Welcome to my budget deck channel, where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not subscribe? Today with a different deck from usual. It's a bit of a slower deck. Well, I mean, we've just had lots of flip decks, so technically it's kind of continuing the route that I've been going anyway. Someone asked me if there is a possible way of making a Graydle somewhat playable, at least I feel. So this is what I came up with. It's not necessarily a pure Graydle deck. There's only a few Graydle cards in here, and that is because most of the Graydle cards are terrible for the modern game, and even back in the day I think there were only a few Graydles that were like slightly playable. So yeah, I'll be talking about the ratios first, which most people that know Graydle will already be like, this is a bit strange, because this is one Graydle Eagle and triple Graydle Alligator. I like the ratio like this because Alligator is very good because this is a go second deck in combination with Graydle Impact, because this is a spell card effect, and obviously this card gains the steal effect when you pop it by a spell card effect, which is quite nice. The thing why we obviously want to run triple Eagle and triple Alligator and maybe like one or two Cobra, but we don't, is because this is a budget deck profile, so obviously I try to keep it as cheap as possible, and you kind of want to run at least 7 Graydles, I feel. In theory you can cut certain cards out and run like 8 or 9 if you feel like it. You could cut stuff like Metaion, for example, or some of the go second cards and run more. You want to have like somewhere between 7 to 9 possible normal summons in this deck, I felt like, ratio wise. It's obviously a bit of tweaking can always be done, but this sounded like the best to me, and playtesting that worked out the best as well, because if you have too many normal summons in your deck, they clog up your hand, because obviously you can only normal summon one, so there's no way to special summon Graydles, so this is a bit of a problem. And if you don't have enough, then you lack a field presence. You can deal with your opponent's cards because there's stuff in this deck that deals with your opponent's cards, but you lack a bit of a field presence. So I'd like to make sure that out of your starting 6 cards, there's at least one card that you can normal summon or set in that regard, and maintain somewhat of a field presence so your opponent can't just walk over you. Obviously, a Graydle Eagle is a very good card because destroy Phoenix Enforcers in the game and so on. There's lots of stuff that you can consider. So if you have this card at 3, run at 3. You could do it like this card at 2 and this card at 2 and so on and so on. I liked the Alligator more than the Eagle because of the whole interaction with Graydle Impact, and sometimes even with stuff like Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, because if your opponent has a monster that cannot be destroyed by card effects and you destroy Alligator, then you can at least yoink it, which is quite nice as well. So this card seemed a bit better for me, plus also the main reason why I did it is because I got 2 Graydle Alligators already, and so I only had to craft 1 Eagle, and yeah, it worked out well for me, and that's kind of the thought behind it. But obviously if you have more Eagles, or if you want to tweak the ratios, then feel free to. We run lots of cards that don't count towards the ultra rare package for me, because they are all in these master pack bundles, quite cheap, so check that out if you haven't already, which is Ash Blossom, Forbidden Droplet, Infinite Impermanence, and Lightning Storm all at one, because you will be able to have these cards without spending lots of money on it, which is quite nice. Yeah, you need these cards because this is a go second deck, and go second decks, especially in the meta right now, and especially in how the game is right now, don't really work that easily anymore if you do not run hand traps or like massive power cards. And yes, that is basically what Ash Blossom does, what Infinite Impermanence does. Forbidden Droplet is quite good in this deck as well, because you run so many spell cards that you can chain this card as well. If your opponent negates stuff that you want to do, then you can chain this, send the spell card to the graveyard, and stuff like that. So there's lots of things you can do. If you have too many Graydles in your hand, technically you can get rid of them. You lose resources with this card, which is a bit annoying, but you know, there's lots of stuff you can do with Forbidden Droplet, so this card is quite nice. Obviously, if you have cards like Maxi, it's worth to run. The problem with Maxi at the moment as well, it's not really a problem, but if you play against Flounder Reese, this card is useless. Thing is, you have a terrible matchup against Flounder Reese anyway. Most budget decks have a terrible matchup against Flounder Reese, so it doesn't really matter in the end what you do with it, but this card would obviously be a nice addition to your hand trap lineup. If you want to be playing a more go first oriented variant, then you can do stuff like Skill Drain, Summon Limit. They can be only one because, well, they shut down. What we try to achieve with these kind of decks is create a simplified game state where then you annoy your opponent with stuff like Kaijus and Graydles and recurring resources. It's not as good as stuff like Sky Striker, which essentially is trying to do the same, or Eldritch, because they have a way better resource game than Kaijus and Graydle have, even though they can add technically a card every turn, which can be quite strong, but obviously the cards that you add are nothing compared to what other decks can add to their hands, so there's that. For the Kaiju lineup, we run Triple Radiant because this is a card you can quite easily get over. It doesn't have too much attack points, and if you have your Waterfront up, this card does nothing during your opponent's turn. During your turn, if you give it to your opponent, which is important because if you have counters on your Waterfront and you give your opponent a Kaiju that does stuff, then you're a bit screwed because, well, you don't want them to, first of all, get rid of your counters, and second of all, you don't want them to disrupt your own plays with the Kaiju that you gave them. So this is, I felt like, the best Kaiju that you could be running. Plus, it's a level 7, which can come up if you want to go into rank 7s, because you run another card that is good go in second, which is Double Wishuda. You could run 2, you could run 3 if you want to. I have still my 3 Monk of the Tenji in here, mainly because of stuff like Paw of Extravagance anyway. But yeah, I felt like a 2 was fine because you can only use it once per turn anyway, and with go second stuff, it's mainly like you want to bait out one negate or get rid of one card of your opponent. So it's, in my opinion, better to run 2 offs or 1 offs of specific cards that all have the same kind of goal, because you can only activate them once per turn or use this kind of stuff once per turn. So if you do this, then you have multiple ways of getting rid of your opponent's stuff rather than bricking on like 2 or 3 of the same card, which I prefer. Like if they're the same usage, then I think it's fine. Usually you want to max out on cards, especially power cards, but with this kind of stuff, my way around it is, yeah, use it like this, and you will be more able to do stuff. If your opponent shuts down 1 or 2 of these, you will have stuff in your hand that you can do. We run 1 Gamma Seal. You don't need to run this card, but since you have Kaiju Slumber, since you have Waterfront, and ways to search these kind of cards, this card can be very nice to keep you inside the game once you simplify the game state a bit, because this card is Walking Omni Negate, which is incredibly strong because it banishes and you only need 2 of the counters from Waterfront. Sadly, I mean, this card obviously banishes, so it doesn't refuel Waterfront again, because that would be insane. But banishing is obviously good sometimes as well, so there's a bit of a give and take with the whole banishing instead of destroying effect. But yeah, well, instead of going to the graveyard in that matter. So this card at 1 is nice. If you don't have it, that's fine, but this card wouldn't even be a bad investment, because this is one of the main Kaijus you want to be playing in the other deck that plays Kaijus anyway, because of the low attack stats. 1 Guitar Lab, because this is also a card that basically does stuff for you. If you summon it to your side of the field, helps you finish your opponent and so on, so there's lots of things you can do. Thunder King is another card that does nothing during your turn for your opponent, but it has 3,300 attack, so it's a bit problematic sometimes because you don't really want to crash into it, and the other Kaijus can't get over this. This is why I run another one of this one, so at least could crash them into each other. Otherwise I would have a very big problem of getting rid of them if I don't have a Graydle and I don't want to run the Graydle into it, so that's a bit of a problem. We have 1 Metaion, the Time Lord, is one of the normal summons in addition to the Graydles that I have. Is because, first of all, it works very well with Kaijus, because in the battle phase, after the battle phase, the effect triggers, and then you get all the cards, all the monsters on the field to go back to the hands of the players, so you can get your own Kaijus back to your hand and burn your opponent a little bit. Plus, this card kind of sometimes saves you for the next turn as well, so your opponent can't OTK you, because this card cannot be destroyed by battle or by card effect, and you take no battle damage from attacks involving this attack position card, which is quite nice. It's a bit funny because technically if you summon it somehow in defense position, or it gets put in defense position, you could piercing damage through it. I don't know why attack position, but you know, maybe I guess we'll install more of this. It makes no difference in the end. But yeah, this card is okay because it shuffles itself back. So in theory, in a simplified game state, you want to have as many cards in your deck that do stuff if you draw them. Like if it's like a top deck war and you're basically every card that you draw matters, then this card does quite a lot if your opponent still has like some board, still goes into like extra deck monsters that can't stop this card. And since it shuffles itself back, you won't really run out of cards. And also, well, obviously you will, because it's doing the standby phase, so you draw before, but it will be a bit slower at least, and in the end you will have a powerful card in your deck still that saves you a turn, and also can deal with problematic cards that cannot negate its effect. So this is quite nice. I like it at 1 because it kind of is a bit of problematic because you either normal summon this because you can't special summon it. You could tribute summon it, but you usually don't really want to. Or you normal summon your Graydle, and that's the problem. If you have too many normal summons, obviously it doesn't work. So 1 is fine. I feel you don't have to run it. If you want to swap it out for 1 more Graydle, then that's fine too. Raigeki, very good card, you get it for free. Monster Reborn, a very good card in a Kaiju deck actually, because you can get some of the monsters that you Kaiju back from your opponent's graveyard, which can be very strong, especially if they play more of a combo oriented deck, and you can get stuff like Baron back, some negates or pops or whatever. So this card is actually quite nice. Plus it gets DPE out of the graveyard, which is also quite important sometimes. Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, a Searcher, and a Field Nuke, which is very, very strong. This is the ultra rare that you want to be running in this deck because, well, it's good. It's good going second. It gives you advantage a bit. It simplifies the game state. It puts Kaijus on your board, especially with Waterfront. That's quite important. So this card, all in all, searches your Kaiju the next turn. I think it's great, and I feel like it's worth running this card. Plus, you can play this theoretically in other go second decks. It's not played as much anymore as it used to, but it's still like not a terrible card to have, I feel. Pot of Extravagance at 2 in this specific variant, because technically you kind of want to run triple Pot of Prosperity for the way of like searching certain cards, because you can't OTK anyway, but Extravagance is also not bad. So I decided to go for the remix of 1 Prosperity and 2 Extravagance, because this card will be limited to 1. They still can't be activated in the same turn basically, but like this you have this kind of option. You could run triple Extravagance if you like. You could cut like Prosperity completely, but after the ban list this card will be at 1 anyway, so you couldn't run 3 of this. So I decided to go for this kind of mixture, but if you feel like you rather want to have like 2 extra cards and use this at the start of your turn, then do it that way. But I felt like Prosperity worked a bit better in this specific variant than Extravagance, so I like having at least these kind of ratios. You could technically play a 3rd Extravagance in addition to your Prosperity, but then they collide a bit more again, and also for a budget deck profile it's not quite what you want to be doing. You could run Desires, but I feel like in this specific variant, since your extra deck basically doesn't matter, Extravagance is a lot better. 1 Lightning Storm, because this is your only way of dealing with back row. If you have multiple, you should probably run multiple. Harpy's Feather Duster is also a card that you could consider, because otherwise you will have a massively terrible time with back row decks, because Graydles don't do anything against back row unless it's Graydle Impact, and Kaijus do nothing against back row. They don't even have like any, there's no Kaiju that has any effect that actually matters for that, so that is problematic. 1 card that is very good because it's a rare card. You can obviously run cards that do more, like Mind Control and whatnot. There's very good going second cards, and this is one of the cards you could swap out for any good hand trap, but against any deck that's not Flaunderies or Eldritch, this card is fairly okay actually. Clears your opponent's board, it doesn't destroy, it sends to the graveyard, it doesn't target, so yeah, I feel like this is a nice card that you can run. And since this deck wants you to get into a grind game anyway, the extra life points barely matter, because you kind of want to out-resource your opponent in the most states anyway. Waterfront, a very good card, because you will be sending a lot of stuff to the graveyard, then you can search every round a Kaiju. This card protects itself against most stuff, not against targeting, but at least against destruction. And yeah, you can ensure with this card that you get a Kaiju to your side of the field as well, because if you already have one, search one, summon that to your field, then you can use the powerful effects that some of these Kaijus have. Graydle Impact, a card that is very interesting. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh! I think you would get away with having the effects not both like once per turn, like you can only activate once in that each, not each of them, which is a bit annoying. I think if this card would have been printed now, would have been fine if it does both, but obviously this card is a bit older, and back then it could have been actually problematic to add in the end phase and pop a card. Yeah, nowadays it's an okay card, but it's not lovely. Like it's super good if you have other Graydles, and especially Alligator, and you can get the effect off, then it gives you quite a lot of advantage, because you steal an opponent's monster and you pop a card, which is quite strong. But if you don't have any other Graydle card, you could technically activate 2 impacts, pop 1 impact, and then pop one of your opponent's cards. It's fine. I like running it because it's a Graydle variant, but it could have been a bit better in my opinion. Forbidden Chalice, one of the budget, instead of hand trap kind of cards, it's okay going first if your opponent forces you to go first, and it's quite good going second, because it will take one of your opponent's monster negates out of the game. And same for Infinite Impermanence and Forbidden Droplet. And for the extra deck, nothing really matters. This is some rank 7s if you have them. This is for the 10 stuff, and the rest is just sometimes Geonator Transverser can be nice, sometimes Puzzlomino can be triggered. It's very hard to, but you could. And the rest is basically just link good stuff that you get for free, because you can make link monsters with Radiant, the multidimensional Kaiju. You can sadly only activate this effect once per turn. It's not hard once per turn for that matter, but it's a once per turn, so you can only get one, but you could get a bit of a field presence with it. It's pointless. Your extra deck really only matters for stuff like Extravagance and Prosperity, and that is what it is. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. That's it from me. Hope you're having a good day. Like, comment, subscribe, all of these kind of things, and see you in the next video, hopefully.